The next Unknown Pleasures screening is happening on the 12th of March, and it's a special screening of films by Richard Lowenstein. And it's my great pleasure to have Richard Lowenstein here talking to us, as well as Digby Houghton, who is the guest curator for the two films that will be screening. Welcome, Digby and Richard.
Hi.
Thanks, Peter.
Now, tell me about the background to this. How Digby, how did it all come about that you worked with Richard to get the two films screening on the 12th of March?
It dates back possibly to like mid or late last year when the New International Bookstore, I think, were approached by Richard to screen, I think, a restoration of his early 80s film Strikebound, about the Wonthaggi miners' strike. And me and my friend James, who's a volunteer at Nibs, were asked by Nibs to interview Richard after the screening. And in learning and reading more about Richard, I kind of delved into his filmography and noticed this gem that lied early on in his career, that he had talked about restoring. And I just thought it would be fantastic to screen. And then it so happened that Richard's in the process of working on a documentary about his mother, Wendy, and we're kind of tying the two together. Yeah.
Ah, what an interesting backstory. And yes, Evictions, of course, is the film that you're talking about from 1979. And of course, Don't Be Too Polite Girls. Both of them screening on the 12th of March. Richard, it's great that Evictions is now being restored. It an early film for you because I remember Strikebound from the 80s so well. But Evictions, I remember seeing before then at some other screening, maybe at the AFI or whatever. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But tell me about making Evictions because it's such a fascinating docudrama slash documentary.
Well, I think it got, you might have seen it. It was playing when Natalie Miller owned the Longford in Toorak Road. I think it was playing in front of a feature film called Mama Turns 100, which you might
Yes.
have seen. And yeah, so Natalie Miller was, and now her son Sean Miller was one of my early kind of supporters and fans and everything. But going back to the inception of the film is I was in the 3 year Swinburne Film and Television undergraduate. I think it's Diploma of Art back then. Um, and I spent the first 2 years kind of goofing off, mainly, not really goofing off, but working on other people's films and not really taking my own stuff seriously. And I think Brian Robinson, the head of the film school, called me in at the end of second year and said, "Look, you've just scraped over the line." And you know, if I hadn't have intervened, you would have failed everything. And but the older students said, you know, you worked as a gaffer and a grip and whatever on all their films, and you helped out. Traffic stopper, I think, on one film, and so we'll give you another year, but you know you've got to pull your finger out. And and at the same time, I had my, you know, I was sort of, I think, was I staying? No, I'd moved out of home. I was sort of living in the Dogs and Space House, but I had my mother sort of always who was an oral historian, sort of always banging on about, oh, this would be a great film, and that story would be a great film, and everything. And kind of weirdly enough, I'd as a teenager, I'd been her tape recorder jockey. You know, as she went out and interviewed old informants about the Great Depression or coal mining or whatever. And I was there from the age of about 10, sort of adjusting the recording levels on her Ewer. It was a Ewer tape recorder. And so all these stories must have seeped in to the young sound recordist. And so the one that she kept banging on about was like, you know, you could do it quite cheaply, was this one about Tom Hills and Noel Counihan. Tom Hills was a former president of the Waterside Workers Federation, and Noel Counihan's a kind of renowned left-wing artist of the time. And she's saying, you've got to listen to these recordings because they just focus on this really amazing story of how they both used to, in the Great Depression, when someone would get turfed out of their house by a tough landlord, well, a gang of these people who were in the unemployed workers union would just get together, arrive to the house in Richmond or Collingwood, usually the little tiny weatherboard houses there before the renovation craze, of course, and would just pull the house apart, and then overnight, and then the landlord would come the next morning. This is after an eviction, of course. The landlord would come the next morning and see there was just an empty block of land and no house there, and they soon learned not to evict people during the Great Depression. They just, like, after 2 or 3 of these things happened, they decided to let the tenants stay in there for no rent until times got better. So she played me those, or she gave me the tapes to listen to and transcriptions, and I was aware of the story, and I was kind of really quite enthused about the I don't know, the strength in numbers aspect, the solidarity, the classic sort of union byline of that story, without necessarily saying, this is about joining a union or anything. It's just a group of people getting together, and the strength in numbers concept. And we were living in that Dogs in Space house, 18 Berry Street, and right across the laneway was these derelict houses, which were very, very similar to what they would have been like in the Great Depression. And in fact, some of us were squatting there when we finally got kicked out of 18 Berry Street. But so we decided that, I guess we must have got permission, but we decided we could actually contact the real estate agent, get permission, and film the sort of pulling apart of one of these tiny little weatherboard houses, and tell that story through the concept of reenacted documentary. So fundamentally, the film is a documentary, but you look at it and you can obviously see my dramatic feature film ambitions coming through, because there's the talking heads, the Noel Counihan, Tom Hills, but a lot of it is dramatized, because of course all they had of that sort of activities was occasional still, and not even that, that's like no one was filming back then, of course. So it's so we dramatized the whole story, and then that's kind of, it got made, and I asked my film school compadre Andrew de Groot to shoot it, and he's still here many years later shooting stuff, and so we just did it, and next thing you know, it's getting invited to festivals, and my assessment went up from 49% to 100% or something by the end of that school year. I think Philip Adams being an old lefty himself, Philip Adams was a huge fan of the film and started calling me an enfant terrible. He was traveling around the world with Evictions to film festivals. I only went to one, but it was a defining film festival for me.
What a fascinating backstory and to the film, because it is such a resonant film, and it's great that you're able to restore it. I suppose there were some challenges involved in now restoring it to the proper print that it now is.
Yes, it was. It's a weird story in that, like, I have an attic just full of tins that I would throw in there, mainly music videos from the 80s and things, and so I probably should credit, at the end, Michael Hutchins, because when we got the film Mystify kind of up and running and funded, we knew that there was Michael Hutchins footage in my attic somewhere, but yet, the labels had fallen off, and it's just so we did a deal with the great Ray Argall, another filmmaker who's now bought himself, or a few years ago, bought himself a Blackmagic film scanner, that does both 16 and 35. So we did a deal with him and just sent the entire attic of footage up to Ray to scan. And back came a number of treasures, including Michael and Kylie's home movie, which we used in Mystified. But one of them was the A and B rolls, the negative A and B rolls. I don't know, older filmmakers will remember that 16mm had to be cut in two separate rolls with A and B. And so the negative A and B rolls came back for Evictions, all beautifully scanned and everything. And Ray saying, "Oh, look what I found, and it looks amazing, and that you should restore it." So the scans have just been sitting there ungraded. It's a bit of work, sort of getting back to the original color, but it's off the negative. It's not off the print, so it's sort of super sharp, and I've got an old version on video that I'm matching the color to. It's almost done, so I'm sure we'll get it to the cinema on time. But yeah, it was amazing. It's just
yeah.
with these cheap home scanners now, that not that cheap. I think it's about 100 grand, no, 30 grand to buy a Blackmagic scanner. You can, yeah, what was incredibly expensive now is relatively economical, just scanning old negative.
Uh-huh. Oh, that is great to hear. And of course, audiences will be able to see that on the 12th of March at Unknown Pleasures. Digby, what's your reaction to Evictions when you had a look at it? Because seeing it through different eyes, I suppose, because I remember it years ago, but you've seen it more recently. What's your response to the film?
It's interesting. I actually am in the process of interviewing a young director from Melbourne who has made a documentary in response to the state government's renewal project, where they're demolishing and redeveloping a lot of a large majority of the public housing stock in Victoria. And she kind of followed the stories of a man called Will and a refugee family. And it was just striking to kind of see a similar, I suppose, ideology, maybe slightly different principles, but yeah, this notion of eviction is interesting. And I think having seen Strikebound as well, I quite like the docudrama. I think it has like I don't love using this word because I find it's generally misused, but I think it has an authentic feel. Some of the um, blend of genre with documentary. I think it's well done. Yeah. And like,
It's yeah, it's. I mean, as I'm restoring, and I sort of look at it and go, "Oh, it's a little bit clunky." I'm certainly no Martin Scorsese back then, but it's an interesting combination of completely inexperienced actors who looked the part, but also a number of quite experienced actors, like Ronald Pennell, and I mean a lot of left wing actors who were getting work in television back then and in theatre, were made themselves available probably through my mother's contacts, and said, "Oh, I think there was one, Meg Ryan, maybe." And it's like so there's a combination, very much like Dogs in Space and Strikebound, combination of non-professionals and professionals mixed together. So some lines of dialogue are good and some lines are a little wobbly, but it does have that sort of improvised sense of
Mm.
realism,
Yes.
to it.
I think yeah, sorry, just I think
Yep,
you
go on.
spoke about that in the Strikebound Q&A, Richard, that as however old you were when you shot Strikebound, you had this kind of naivety that you could do the Bresson like non-actor
Yes,
um
yes.
thing.
I was actually pretty much, I think I was emulating more the Ken Loach thing, but I sort of discovered in the years later that he actually uses quite, he does find, especially the kids sometimes, like in Kes, he'll find a discovery, but he uses people and auditions who really are quite wonderful actors. But I was imagining with a lot of us arrogant film school students did back then, that, with the right direction, we could be like Stanley Kubrick and we can get a performance or out of anybody. It's the director who's really acting, not the actor. I've since learned that lesson. Yeah.
Again, very interesting to hear that, and but it's amazing too how the whole issue of docudrama has taken off, with so many documentary filmmakers now using that approach, sometimes wisely, sometimes not so, to tell an important story. So yeah, you're one of the pioneers, I suppose.
And I've got my whole family in there. I think mum and dad are in there. My uncle Johnny's there. They all look very suitably 1930s and depression like, And they had all the research. Most of my mother's side of the family had been in the including my dad too, been in the Communist Party back then, even though it was post-war Communist Party, very similar, and they met all the 1930s communists like Watty and Agnes Doig, who made Strikebound out. They knew Noel Counihan extremely well, who was an older generation to them. And so they were immersed in these kind of working class struggle stories in their post-war years in the Communist Party, and their connections with things like the Realist Film Unit and everything, which you'll see the footage of in the following film, the Don't Be Too Polite Girls, about Mum and her best friend Shirley Andrews, who are both oral historians, but the Realist Film Unit of the post-war years were the only people actually filming left-wing activities, whether they be May Day rallies or the Eureka Youth League, or a number of new theatre productions, which was the Communist Party back then theatre company. No record would exist without those people like Jerry Harrington, the Realist Film Unit, actually pulling out their 16mm cameras and filming all that stuff. And now, again, with the scanning, it looks beautiful. So it's thank God they were bringing out their 16mm. I think they were all sort of emulating a combination of the sort of the post-war British realist sort of documentary scene, and also there was, yeah, they had a sense of realist cinema. They had a very much a working class story aesthetic. So they were very much there filming, and these little films that we use excerpt from are great
Look,
to see. And yeah.
yeah, I was going to say, Don't Be Too Polite Girls. It's the second time now I've seen that short film, which of course must become a feature documentary, because there is so much rich material, archival footage, photos, so much research and information of a period which isn't that well known, certainly in terms of the Communist Party and so on. So it's fantastic that you have that 25-minute, in a sense, teaser, I call it, for the potential feature documentary. I hope it happens.
Yeah, so do I. It's a very tough climate, and the funding bodies are very tough these days. Whether it's changing sensibility or whether it's restricted budgets, hard to know. But it's a film that would have instantly got funded 10 years ago, but it just seems like, who is your audience for this? And the distributors don't, the distributors who used to put up money for, eclectic things like autoluminescent, they might have put up 50 grand or something small, but they don't put up anything now. They say, yeah, we'll play it, but we can't offer you any upfront money. So, and that's the trigger that gets Screen Australia and Film Victoria, or now Vic Screen, on board. And so yeah, I have had good support from Vic Screen, and going back to apply again to them. Screen Australia is a little strange these days, but this sort of subject matter, which should be getting made, even if it's just for archival history. has incredible trouble getting finance. So we're resorting to crowdfunding. And of course, the ABC used to be the big sort of broadcaster of this stuff, and they just laugh at you and say, "Oh, we'll do a show about Kylie if you've got any Kylie footage." But it's like it's all about clicks, and it's not even about ratings anymore. It's all about something that will get a lot of clicks. It's kind of insane. But Compass were interested, and then they had their budget cut, and then so they had to say no. And it's just hopefully with the new chairperson or whatever, things might change with the ABC. But it is outrageous what's going on in the world of documentary in Australia at the moment. It's just, I don't know how anyone gets funding.
Yes, I'm hearing so many stories exactly like yours about documentaries not being funded and about just looking at any commercial stories that may get some money, but it's just ridiculous. I mean, I know the National Film and Sound Archive would be fully supportive, and Documentary Australia Foundation, and there are so many other bodies
Yeah.
that perhaps could get behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a crowdfunding with Documentary Australia, which is going slowly but surely. But once that gets to a certain level, then I think the funding bodies, Screen Australia, Screen will see have a bit more confidence in the project and come on board, and the MIF Premier Fund, and that, it's all a bit in flux. But we hope to, it is such remarkable footage that we have access to, and stills that just sit there in the Film and Sound Archive, and obviously it's only a few students that dig it out for research, but this is stuff that should be seen. And we were looking at May Day March and also ASIO footage. We can access ASIO. ASIO loved filming the communists, which was great for us because they filmed all the May Day rallies in black and white, unfortunately, but they filmed all the May Day rallies, so we're going through all the kind of ASIO footage, going, "There's Mum, there's Dad, there's my brother," and so it's that's going to be great as well. But otherwise, you just never see this stuff,
Yes. Yes, I was thinking ASIO perhaps could even fund the documentary. That would be beautifully ironic.
I'm hoping so. We're in the process of getting Mum's file at the moment, and cross-referencing to any footage, and also Shirley Andrews has also got a file who's the film's about, but we've accessed their file. But they were crazy busy following those people and chronicling them. And, they were the early historians. Without those ASIO surveillance people, we'd have none of this record.
That is very true. All right, I'm rapidly running out of time with my Zoom, but Digby, if I can ask you, on the 12th of March, tell us more about the event, the two films, the screening. Richard, of course, will be there, etc.
Yeah, so Tuesday, March 12th, the day after Labor Day, long weekend, get down to Thornbury Picture House. I think it's a 6:30 start.
Yes.
And there'll be a screening of Evictions and then Don't Be Too Polite Girls. And then Richard and I'll moderate a Q&A with Richard, and Bill Masoulis is the kind of overarching organizer whose little crew, Unknown Pleasures, are promoting the event. So they're sort of, I don't think they need an introduction at this program, but yeah, they're devoted to kind of unearthing underappreciated Australian film and directors.
And I should just give a shout out to my sister who initiated the Don't Be Too Polite project with her. She got a fellowship from the National Library in Canberra, and she kind of harassed me to, get away from rock music and pop stars and do this, to support her. And yeah, I mean, thank God I did, but she was the real driving force behind it. Hopefully she's going to come, but she won't do Q&As, she reckons.
Well, what a great opportunity for audiences to see Evictions and Don't Be Too Polite Girls, which must turn into a feature documentary. And apart from hopefully that happening, Richard, I must ask you, are you working on anything else at the moment?
Yes, we're I'm working on a drama which has again got documentary overtones, but it is a drama based on the hippie school I went to in the 1970s, which was kind of a collection of all these left-wing parents mixing, and their kids, of course, mixing with a whole lot of kids from the outer suburbs who were there to, make sure we weren't too elitist, So it's a comedy, but it's also got very political overtones set in the mid 70s. It's like we had people like Gary Foley as a guest lecturer back then, and we had, or it was a little bit of a cult with a head coordinator running the school, but there was no rules at all. You didn't have to go to class. You could just sit out in the park that was next door if you wanted. And it was, as you can imagine, it was a lot of the parent-teacher nights were just a whole lot of left-wing parents arguing with each other, and some poor outer suburban parents from Ferntree Gully going, "What the hell is going on? And is my kid ever going to get an education?" And finally, the school collapsed in about 2 years, but it produced an extraordinary number of filmmakers: Ray Argall, Sharon Connolly, Trevor Graham, Ned Lander, Jan Argall, the producer, myself.
Yeah.
It was a very much I think 50% of the graduates ended up in films. In one, we had Scott Murray, the editor of Cinema Paper, and Peter Bilby as teachers there. Well, Scott Murray is our maths teacher. We had, we had Gordon Glenn was teaches how to load a Bolex, and so it was very, I guess it's my Fanny and Alexandra, not myself, but it's not coming of age though. I mean, it is partly coming of age, but it looks at how we bring up our children, and
Yeah.
do we really need all this institutionalization?
The school actually sounds familiar. What was the name of it?
Brinsley Road Alternative School.
Ah,
Yeah.
Brinsley Road. I was thinking of something else.
It was in Camberwell, lasted for about
Ah,
2 to 3 years before it imploded and became then kind of turned into St Kilda Alternative. But I didn't go. I got yanked out and sent to Camberwell High because I couldn't read or write at that stage. And it's like I'd never
God.
written an essay in my life. But I've got to say, Camberwell High didn't teach me how to write an essay either. But
Oh,
my mother,
wow.
who was a school teacher, she just said, you can't spell, you haven't written an essay in an entire 2 years, and I think it's time to leave.
Now, there's another film I want to see. I hope
Yeah,
that gets made soon because it's that
yeah.
and the feature doco of Don't Be Too Polite Girls, two great
I
projects
think
come.
we're trying to do that as a TV series, with one of the
Ah,
streamers. Fingers
ah.
crossed.
Well, it sounds terrific. Excellent stuff. We've been speaking to Digby Houghton, who is the guest curator for Unknown Pleasures for March the 12th screening of two films by Richard Lowenstein, Evictions and Don't Be Too Polite Girls, and Richard Lowenstein, who'll be there at the screening. And Richard and Digby, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Peter.
A
I'll
pleasure.
see you guys later.
See you.
See you later.
See ya.
Bye bye.